That piece of paper had been sitting at the bottom of my tote bag for 3 solid years. I never thought today would be the day I'd actually have to pull it out. When the doorbell rang, I was out on the balcony pruning my Rosa night owl. It was a quintessential late June afternoon in Chicago, the kind of suffocating, stagnant Midwest heat that makes it hard to expand your lungs. Down in the tree-lined streets of Lincoln Park, the cicadas were swelling into a deafening rhythmic wall of sound, as if forecasting that something profoundly abnormal was about to happen. The moment I swung the door open, I saw her. She was young, wearing a breezy blush pink floral maternity sundress. Her belly was slung high and tight, looking like an overinflated balloon on the verge of snapping. There were faint violet shadows beneath her lower lashes, and though her lips carried a nervous tremor, she forced her chin up into a sharp, practiced angle of defiance. "I'm carrying your husband's baby," she said. "If you have any dignity left, you'll sign the divorce papers and step aside." I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. Her pupils flickered, clearly thrown off by how still I was. In truth, my heart was hammering against my ribs so violently. I could hear the pulse in my eardrums, and the blood had rushed straight to the crown of my head. But my right hand had already slipped into the side pocket of my leather tote, my fingertips grazing the crisp edge of a single folded sheet of paper. That paper was a blade I had sharpened 3 years ago when I married David Miller on a crisp New England autumn afternoon, 3 years back. The general consensus among our mutual acquaintances was that I had hit the jackpot. He was one of the city's most sought-after boutique residential architects. Polished, soft-spoken, impeccably educated at Rhode Island School of Design, and already running his own high-end design firm in the West Loop before his 32nd birthday. And me, I was just a standard Sue 11th grade AP literature teacher at a public high school. My parents ran a small independent hardware store up in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Standing next to him at gallery openings, I always felt like a prop borrowed from an entirely different tax bracket. But romance, as they say, never bothers to check a credit score or a family trust. We had met at a mutual friend's housewarming party in Wicker Park. He arrived late, draped in a tailored charcoal overcoat, bringing a sudden gust of late November draft into the stifling apartment that caught the corner of a paper cocktail napkin resting near my wine glass. "Sorry about that," he'd said, catching the napkin. His voice sitting at that perfect low register, like wrapping both hands around a warm ceramic mug on a freezing night. Later, he told me he hadn't retained a single detail about the apartment that evening. He had only remembered the way my eyes crinkled when I laughed. We dated for 14 months and slipped into marriage with an effortless, frictionless grace. The wedding wasn't a spectacle, just 60 of our closest friends and family at a historic conservatory. I stood beside him in a simple silk sheath dress, grinning so wide my jaw arched. My mom sat in the second row, dabbing her eyes with a shredded tissue, while my dad patted her shoulder, whispering, "Stop it, Linda. Let the girl be happy. She found a good one." Back then, I didn't know that a marriage is often like a luxury townhouse. Breathtaking brickwork on the facade, while the interior drywall is quietly rotting away over a nest of hidden nails. The first 2 years were genuinely good. David's firm kept him at his drafting table until 8 o'clock most nights. But he made it a point to sit down for a late dinner with me. We lived in a sun-drenched 2-story loft on Armitage Avenue. I filled the south-facing bay windows with potted perennials. He'd occasionally take over the watering duties, though he consistently overwatered them until 3 of my prize hydrangeas drowned in their own saucers. Our only recurring friction centered on the concept of a nursery. By our first anniversary, his mother, Susan, began her campaign. She didn't demand it outright. Susan was far too waspy for vulgarity. But over Sunday brunches at the Drake, she'd dropped surgical strikes. David's partner just set up a $529 college fund for his newborn. Or I drove past that lovely monastery preschool on Webster yesterday. The wait list is apparently 2 years long. I would just smile, take a slow sip of my Earl Grey, and let the porcelain cup click against the saucer. David usually ran interference for me. "Give it a rest, Mom," he'd say, placing a warm hand over my knee under the linen tablecloth. "We're enjoying our time." But year one bled into year two, and my cycle remained stubbornly, punctually regular. Even my own mother started getting twitchy, secretly slipping me the business card of a holistic reproductive endocrinologist in Evanston. She worked miracles for the pastor's daughter, Maeve. Just go get your levels checked. I didn't go because deep down, I already knew the machinery on my end wasn't the problem. 6 months into our marriage, while hunting for a spare lightning cable in the bottom drawer of David's home office filing cabinet, I had stumbled across a printed laboratory report from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. It belonged to David. The diagnostic summary was typed in clear cold Helvetica. Non-obstructive azoospermia. Total viable spermatozoon count 0. Natural conception probability statistically 0. I hadn't gasped. I hadn't confronted him. I had silently placed the manila folder back into the exact millimeter of dust I'd pulled it from, walked out of the apartment, and booked myself a comprehensive fertility panel at Rush University Medical Center the following Tuesday. When my results came back clean, the attending physician smiled and said, "You have the ovarian reserve of a 25-year-old, Mrs. Vance." That night I lay awake in the dark. Listening to the hum of the central AC, David rolled over, his arm draping heavily across my waist, his warm breath exhaling rhythmically against the nape of my neck. Staring at the ceiling shadows, I kept turning the kaleidoscope of his motives. Why keep this buried? Was it a man's fragile pride? Was he terrified I'd look at him like a defective model? I chose not to interrogate him. Instead, the next day, I went to the hospital's records department, pulled a duplicate copy of his lab work, put it inside a plastic sleeve, and zipped it into the hidden interior compartment of my everyday work tote. That piece of paper felt like a dormant bulb buried in frozen soil. I didn't know what kind of grotesque flower it was going to sprout, but I knew it was alive. Time drifted on. To the outside observer, David and I were the portrait of thriving urban domesticity, but I could feel the microscopic shift in the tectonic plates between us. Every so often, catching me reading on the sofa, his gaze would linger on my profile with an emotion I couldn't fully decode. Was it guilt, anxiety, or a quiet, preemptive resentment? We had turned into two world-class theater actors sharing a stage, each performing an intricate soliloquy that the other was pretending not to hear. The audience, Susan, my parents, our dinner party circuit gave us standing ovations for a heartwarming romantic comedy, completely ignorant of the trapdoor built into the floorboards. By year 3, Susan's hints turned into direct subpoenas. During a Thanksgiving dinner prep, she set down her carving knife, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Maeve, darling, 33's not 23. If there is a physiological blockage on your part, modern science can work around it. But pride will leave you in an empty house." I kept my voice level as I wiped down the marble island. "We're letting nature take its course, Susan." Out of the corner of my eye, I caught David sitting at the breakfast nook. His head was bowed over his iPad, his fingers gripping the edge of his coffee mug so hard his knuckles had turned the color of skim milk. That was the exact moment I realized the most lethal substance in a marriage isn't infidelity or screaming matches. It is asymmetry. It's one person sitting on a massive life-altering truth, watching their partner take the blame for the fallout, and deciding that the warmth of their own ego is worth more than their partner's sanity. I genuinely believed that was our ceiling, that we would simply exist as a childless couple bound by a mutual, unspoken pact of polite cowardice until we grew old. Then Ashley Adams showed up and swung a wrecking ball through my curated glass living room. David was supposedly in Denver for a high-stakes commercial design pitch. He'd packed his garment bag, kissed my forehead, and promised to be back by Thursday night. The doorbell rang 3 times sharp, staccato, refusing to be ignored. I set down my brass watering can and walked across the wide, white oak floorboards. When I pulled the heavy door inward, a wall of humid Midwest heat slapped my face, carrying the cloying, overripe perfume of the neighbor's blooming gardenias. The afternoon glare was blinding. I had to squint for several seconds before the silhouette on my welcome mat resolved into a human being. She looked roughly 24. Her hair was bleached, a stark platinum, the bottom 3 in dip, dyed a faded pastel sage green. Her makeup was meticulously applied for a Tuesday afternoon dewy skin. Brushed up brows, coral lip gloss, but it was the sheer mass of her midsection that demanded the room. She looked at least 7 months along. She stood there, tilting her chin up to meet my eyes. Her expression was a messy cocktail of teenage bravado, profound insecurity, and the manic adrenaline of someone who had practiced this monologue in her rearview mirror for 40 minutes. "You're Maeve?" she asked. Her voice was surprisingly high, almost musical. "Sarah Jensen, who's asking?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at her own stomach, her manicured hand dropping to perform a slow, protective sweep across the tight fabric of her dress. A territorial flag being planted in my doorway. Then she looked back up. "My name is Talia. I'm carrying David's baby." The sentence didn't register as a physical blow. It registered as a glitch in the simulation. David's baby, the man whose Soroli cells don't produce a single viable gamete. I leaned my shoulder against the door jamb and crossed my arms. Ashley Adams' deep brown pupils dilated slightly. She had clearly anticipated tears, a slamming door, or a hysterical suburban screech. My absolute lack of kinetic energy seemed to throw her script into a buffer state. "You're carrying his baby," I repeated, my voice flat. She pushed her belly an inch forward. "We've been together for 18 months. He told me he's going to file for divorce. It's just a matter of timing with his firm's restructuring, but I can't wait on his tax schedule anymore. This little girl is coming in 8 weeks. And I refuse to bring my daughter into the world while her father is still legally attached to a roommate." It was a remarkably delivered speech. If I hadn't spent the last 36 months carrying a Northwestern lab report in my bag, I probably would have collapsed onto the parquet floor. "So, you came here?" I said softly, to act as his eviction notice. "I didn't come to hurt you," she said, her tone suddenly dropping into the patronizing, gentle cadence of a hospice nurse explaining a terminal chart. "Maeve, look, I know you're a good person. David told me everything. You guys have been married 3 years and haven't been able to conceive. That does something to a couple. It breaks the foundation. He stayed with you out of obligation. But what we have is real. Just let him go. It's better for everyone's mental health." How exquisitely modern, I thought, framing the destruction of a household as an act of communal self-care. I reached into the deep pocket of my linen trousers, my fingers closing around my iPhone, my thumb instinctively sliding the screen open to press the red record button on the voice memos app. "Does David know you're standing on my porch right now?" I asked. Her eyelids fluttered a microtel. "Yes, we discussed it. He sent a woman 7 months pregnant to do his heavy lifting while he's in Colorado. He's in back-to-back site meetings." She snapped, her defensive pitch spiking. "Besides, some things are better handled woman to woman, woman to woman." As if we were sorting out a disputed property line over a shared hedge. I stepped back, opening the doorway wide. "Come inside, Talia. The heat index is 94 out there. I'd hate for you to pass out on my concrete." She blinked, genuinely disoriented by the hospitality. Her eyes darting to my face to search for a hidden tripwire, but the sheer weight of her 3rd trimester won out. She waddled past me into the foyer, leaving a trail of expensive vanilla-heavy Sephora perfume in her wake. I shut the door, cutting off the frantic buzzing of the Lincoln Park cicadas, and followed her into the living room. She stood near the center of the Persian rug, taking a slow, inventory-like scan of the space. Every object in this room had been debated over coffee. The Lowe's Long West Elm sectional, the framed architectural sketches of the Chicago Public Library, the hand-thrown ceramic vases we'd hauled back from a road trip to TA. She picked a single armchair, lowering herself down with a heavy pregnant sigh, adjusting her posture until her belly sat proudly at the apex of her silhouette. "You're really not going to yell?" she asked, her voice betraying her first genuine crack of uncertainty. I took the opposite end of the sofa, tucking one leg beneath me. "Whether I scream or not is my business right now. I want the chronology. Tell me how this started." Talia took a long, shaky breath and launched into her narrative. She was a junior design coordinator sent over by a partner contracting firm 18 months ago to assist David's studio on a boutique hotel renovation in Fulton Market. David had mentored her. He bought her iced oat milk lattes. He remembered she had a mild allergy to stone fruits. He insisted on putting her in Ubers when the winter sleep hit the loop. She recited the milestones like a girl reading entries from a locked diary. He told me he felt like he was suffocating at home. She murmured, her lower lip trembling slightly. He said when he was with me, the world felt colorful again. He promised me that once the hotel project wrapped, he'd sit down with his attorney. She paused after every major beat, waiting for my face to contort. I gave her nothing. I sat there like an AP grader reviewing a standard 5-paragraph essay on The Great Gatsby. When her story finally ran out of runway, a single tear escaped her lash line, tracing a clean, shiny path through her Fenty foundation before dropping onto her pink collar. Maeve, I know I'm the villain in your head, but you can't fight biology. My baby deserves a full-time father. Watching her weep, I didn't feel a shred of hatred toward her. I felt an overwhelming, almost clinical sense of vertigo. She was performing with such astonishing sincerity because she genuinely believed her own reality. She believed she was the star of a sweeping, tragic romance. She believed the man in Denver loved her. I reached into my tote sitting on the floor beside the coffee table, pulled out the clear plastic sleeve containing the folded medical record, slid the paper out, and laid it flat on the walnut wood between us. I have the audio of your story saved, I said, pointing to my phone. Now, I have one technical question for you, Talia. Are you 100% certain that the child inside you belongs to David Miller? Her pupils constricted into tiny, hard pinpricks. The residual pink drained out of her cheeks so fast she looked like she was going into shock. What? What is that supposed to mean? It means, I said, tapping the bottom right corner of the document, that 3 years ago, before David and I signed our marriage license, he underwent a comprehensive semen analysis at Northwestern Medicine. The diagnosis is ozoospermia. His viable sperm count is absolute 0. He is medically incapable of fathering a child without surgical extraction and IVF. Ashley Adams' face turned the color of wet chalk. Her jaw worked silently, her mouth opening and closing like a landed trout. Her knuckles went stark white against the upholstered arms of my chair. You're making this up to mess with me, she whispered, her voice cracking into static. The hospital's official embossed watermark is right there at the top, I said softly. The attending physician's national provider identifier number is printed at the bottom. You have a smartphone in your purse. You can cross-reference Dr. Robert Davis on the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation website right now. This isn't an opinion, Talia. It's a lab result. She didn't reach for the paper. She stared at it as if it were an unexploded mortar shell resting on my coffee table. Her chest began to heave, the blush pink fabric over her belly rising and falling in erratic, shallow jerks. Then, with a sudden, violent jolt, she launched herself out of the armchair. The momentum threw her off balance. Her hip clipped the corner of the side table, sending a stack of Architectural Digest magazines sliding to the floor. She didn't look back. She scrambled toward the front entryway, her gait clumsy and frantic, like someone trying to outrun a structural collapse. I stood up at a measured, deliberate pace and followed her. She had the heavy deadbolt turned and the door cracked open. One sneaker was out on the hot limestone porch. The other was still planted on my indoor rug. She was frozen in the threshold, trapped between the suffocating heat of the street and the sub-zero reality of my foyer. I stepped up behind her, reaching past her shoulder to place my open palm firmly against the doorframe, pinning her in place. Hold on, I said. She whipped her head around. Her eyes were wide, feral, reflecting a version of my face. I hardly recognized a face entirely devoid of empathy, carrying the faint, terrifying ghost of a smile. Talia, I said, keeping my voice low enough that the mailman walking across the street wouldn't catch the frequency. Before you walk off my property, you need to figure out whose DNA is currently growing inside your uterus. Because if you try to pass another man's child off on my husband to secure a real estate settlement, we won't be settling this in family court. We'll be settling it at the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. Her face went entirely blank. A whiteboard wiped clean of every human emotion, saved for raw, prehistoric terror. Her fingernails dug into the painted wood of the door jamb. Out in the trees, the cicadas abruptly cut their collective hum. The entire street dropped into a dead, vacuum-sealed silence. And inside that silence, the only sound left was the steady, metronomic thud of my own heartbeat. She stood there trembling, her bare knees knocking together, making a faint click-click sound against the doorframe. I could literally watch the gears grinding behind her forehead as her brain desperately tried to calculate a survival vector. You wouldn't tell anyone," she stammered, her voice stripped of its musicality. "You'd be humiliated." I took my hand off the wood and took one step backward into the cool air of the foyer. "You're free to leave, Talia, but the second your car pulls away from my curb, I hand this recording to my attorney." She hovered on the welcome mat, her gaze ricocheting frantically between the bright sun-baked sidewalk outside and the cool shadowed sanctuary of my living room. Finally, her eyes dropped to the folded piece of paper still resting in my hand. "What do you want?" she croaked. "It's not about what I want," I said, tucking the paper back into my pocket. "It's about what you want. You came here to collect a husband. You can't claim a man when you don't even know wothered your baby. That's textbook paternity fraud." "It is David's," she shrieked, her voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "He told me himself." She clamped her teeth down over her lower lip, biting off the rest of the sentence so hard a bead of bright red blood on the skin. "He told you what?" I asked, tilting my head. "That he's a medical miracle. Or did he simply forget to mention his biology?" She stared at the floorboards, her chest heaving. The elevator down the hall gave its signature ding. Someone was coming up to our floor. The sound acted like a physical cattle prod. Tia flinched violently, stepping backward off the porch and retreating deep into my entryway to hide from the hallway view. I clicked the door shut, latching the deadbolt. "Sit back down," I said, gesturing toward the living room. "We're going to finish the timeline." She didn't take the armchair this time. She dropped onto the far end of the sectional, pulling her knees up as high as her third trimester allowed, wrapping both arms tightly around her stomach like a cornered animal protecting its softest flank. I picked up my phone from the table. The screen was still lit. The red timer on the voice memo read 1842. "David told you I was the one who couldn't have kids," I stated. It wasn't a question. Talia looked up. Her mascara smudged into two bruised-looking thumbprints beneath her eyes. He said your reproductive system was compromised. He said you were deeply fragile about it, and that if he filed for divorce while you were undergoing treatments, you'd have a psychiatric break. He told me he was just waiting for your therapy to stabilize." I actually laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was the pure, unadulterated laughter of someone watching a magician pull a dead rabbit out of a hat. The sheer architectural audacity of the man. He had constructed a double-blind Russian nesting doll lie. To his mother and our social circle, he played the fiercely loyal husband protecting his barren wife from society's judgment. To his 2 4-year-old mistress, he played the tragic, self-sacrificing martyr trapped in a marriage with an unstable woman whose broken womb he was too noble to abandon. Every single layer was synthetic but stacked together. It formed a fortress that allowed David Miller to look like a saint to every woman he was currently defrauding. "And your OB-GYN appointments?" I asked, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye, the 20-wee anatomy scan. "Did he sign the intake forms?" "He came to 2, she whispered, her head dropping. "He said his studio's indemnity insurance made it complicated for him to be listed on public hospital records until the divorce was finalized. He took the ultrasound printouts with him. He said keeping them at my place was a security liability." "A security liability." "Talia," I said, leaning forward, my voice dropping all its sarcasm. "Look at me. If David Miller genuinely intended to leave me for you, why didn't he just sit me down at this kitchen island 3 months ago and tell me he wanted out? We don't have kids. We don't have a messy custody battle. Why send you a 7-month pregnant woman to face a woman he claimed was mentally unstable?" The question landed like a lead weight right on the center of her sternum. She froze because I answered for her. He didn't want the friction. He wanted you to do the ugly, screaming part of the demolition so he could walk into the wreckage afterward with clean hands. She didn't argue. She just sat there, her chin tucked into her collarbone, her shoulders beginning to shake in silent, rhythmic spasms. It was a miserable, hollow sound. "Pull out your phone," I instructed. She sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her wrist. "Why call him right now? Put it on speaker. Tell him you're sitting on my sofa. Tell him I'm hysterical and ask him what your next step should be." She looked at her purse like it contained live hornets. For a long 30 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Then, with trembling fingers, she unzipped her bag, pulled out an iPhone with a cracked screen protector, and unlocked it. I caught a glimpse of her lock screen. A candid photo of David laughing at a rooftop restaurant in West Loop. His contact name was saved as David. She dialed. I pointed a sharp finger at the screen. She hit speaker. The line rang 3 times. When it clicked open, David's voice filled my living room warm, rushed, carrying that familiar, breezy confidence. "Talia, hey, sweetie. I'm stepping out of the conference room. Did you talk to her? Did she make a scene?" Talia closed her eyes. A fresh wave of tears squeezed out of her lids. She took a massive, shuddering breath to stabilize her vocal cords. "David, I'm here. She's being really weird." "Weird how?" His tone dropped an octave, the warmth evaporating instantly into sharp administrative annoyance. "Is she threatening to call her dad? Tell her to calm down. She wants to call a lawyer, David, she says. She says she's going to contest everything." A short pause on the Denver end. Then David let out a dry, dismissive scoff. "Let her try. Illinois is strictly a no-fault divorce state. Talia conduct doesn't dictate the dissolution. She's just throwing a tantrum because her pride is wounded. Listen to me. Do not engage with her emotional bait. The mortgage on the Armitage loft is solely in my name. The marital equity split is standard 50/50ths. If she tries to drag out discovery, my counsel will bury her in legal fees until she signs the standard settlement." I watched Ashley Adams' face. The last microscopic thread of her romantic fantasy snapped right in front of my eyes. "David," she said, her voice dropping into a dead, flat monotone. "What about the baby? What happens when she's born?" "We've been over this," he said, his impatience now fully unmasked. "Once the child arrives, the social narrative takes care of itself. People will see the baby and naturally assume our marriage ended. Because she couldn't give me a family. It keeps my firm's reputation clean with the North Shore clients. You just need to hold your ground today. I'll wire another $3,000 into your account tonight for the nursery furniture." "David," Talia whispered, "did you ever actually plan to marry me?" The silence that followed was so heavy it felt pressurized. When David spoke again, his voice was ice cold, stripped of every single ounce of the mentor who used to buy her oat milk lattes. "Talia, do not ask tedious questions while I am trying to secure a $4 million digital render contract. Do you remember what your bank account looked like when I pulled you out of that bullpen? I pay your rent. I pay your car note. Be smart. Go home and let my attorney handle Maeve." I reached across the coffee table and tapped the red end call icon on her screen. The line went dead. Tia didn't scream. She didn't throw her phone. She simply tipped her forehead forward until it rested against her knees, wrapped her arms over her head, and began to sob with the deep, hyperventilating agony of someone whose entire internal compass had just been smashed with a hammer. I didn't offer her a tissue. I didn't pat her back. There are certain moments of profound human reckoning where offering comfort is just a cheap way of making yourself feel less awkward. Instead, I stood up, walked into my home office, and retrieved a legal pad. When I came back, she had exhausted the violent part of her crying. "Open your WhatsApp," I said softly. "Export your entire 18-month chat history with David to my email address. Then, open your banking app and screenshot every single rental deposit, furniture transfer, and medical copay wire he sent you." She did it without a single word of protest. She sat there like an automaton, her fingers moving across the glass screen. forwarding the digital receipts of her own exploitation into my inbox. When the final file transferred, she stood up slowly, using the edge of the sofa to hoist her belly. She looked 10 years older than the girl who had swaggered onto my porch 2 hours ago. She walked to the front door, turned around, and executed a stiff, formal bow. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance, don't apologize to me," I said, looking at the tight curve of her sundress. "Go to an independent clinic tomorrow morning and get a standard prenatal panel. Then find a family law practitioner who doesn't owe David Miller a favor." She nodded once, slipped out the door, and walked toward the elevator. David got back to the loft at 9:15 p.m. when the brass deadbolt turned. I was sitting at the dining table with a single glass of Pinot Noir. On the white oak tabletop laid 3 distinct items: the embossed Northwestern Laboratory printout, an iPad cued to the 18-minute audio recording, and a neat stapled stack of printed WhatsApp screenshots. He walked in smelling of aviation fuel and expensive Tom Ford cologne, his navy suit jacket slung casually over one shoulder. He looked tired, handsome, and entirely ready to play the exhausted suburban breadwinner. "Hey, sweetie," he called out, kicking off his loafers in the foyer. Flight was delayed sitting on the tarmac at O'Hare for 40 minutes. You won't believe that he stopped dead at the edge of the kitchen island. His eyes locked onto the 3 items arranged on the table for roughly 5 seconds. The studio architect who could charm. $500,000 retainers out of Gold Coast Heiresses completely vanished. His posture went rigid. The color drained out of his jawline until the 5 o'clock shadow on his cheeks looked like soot. "Sit down, David," I said, taking a sip of my wine. He didn't sit. He took 2 steps toward the table, his eyes darting to the Northwestern logo at the top of the page, and instantly deployed the classic textbook reflex of the cornered narcissist. "Attack the protocol. You rifled through my private desk." His voice spiked hard and accusatory. "That is a blatant violation of my privacy, Maeve." I didn't answer him. I simply reached forward and tapped the play icon on the iPad. His own voice filled the high-ceiling kitchen. "Once the child arrives, the social narrative takes care of itself. People will see the baby and naturally assume our marriage ended because she couldn't give me a family. It keeps my firm's reputation clean." David's face underwent a fascinating chromatic breakdown, turning from stark white to a mottled, furious crimson, and finally settling into a sickly grayish ash. When the audio cut out, the loft was dead silent. "Maeve," he began, his voice suddenly dropping into a breathless, desperate register as he dropped into the chair opposite me. "You don't understand the psychological toll. Do you have any idea what it does to a man to sit in a sterile clinic and be told his body is a dead end? Watching my mother, watching our friends buy strollers, I felt like an absolute shell." I stared at him over the rim of my wineglass. "So, to cure your existential dread, you decided to outsource the public humiliation to your wife." "I was going to tell you," he pleaded, reaching across the table to grab my hand. I pulled my hand back so fast his fingers slapped the bare oak. When Talia told me she was pregnant, my brain just short-circuited. Part of me knew the science said it was impossible, but another part of me thought, what if the lab was wrong? What if it's a miracle? A miracle. I repeated, my voice dropping into absolute zero. "You didn't demand a prenatal paternity test. You didn't go get a second count at Rush. You immediately calculated the real state equity on this loft and sent a pregnant girl to act as your human shield." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing violently against his tailored collar. "Maeve, please. We can fix this. I'll cut her off tomorrow. I'll change my number. We can go to couples therapy." I stood up, walked to the hallway closet, and wheeled out my pre-packed Samsonite carry-on suitcase. David scrambled out of his chair, rushing across the room to clamp his hand over my wrist. "Maeve, don't do this. You walk out that door right now, and you throw away 3 years of our life over a stupid, messy mistake." I looked down at his long manicured architect's fingers wrapped around my skin. The same fingers that had slipped a platinum band onto my left hand. The same fingers that used to trace the bridge of my nose while I fell asleep. I felt an overwhelming, profound wave of nausea. With my free hand, I pried his fingers off my wrist. one individual digit at a time. David, I said, looking straight into his panicked brown eyes. You still don't get it. Whether that girl keeps her baby or whether your firm survives the fiscal year, none of that is my concern anymore. The point is that I am permanently disgusted by you. I grabbed the handle of my luggage and walked out the door. I didn't drive up to my parents' house in Kenosha that night. I didn't want my mother seeing me arrive at midnight looking like a refugee from a failed domestic experiment. Instead, I checked into a quiet boutique hotel near the Newberry Library. The room was small, facing a brick alleyway, where the amber glow of a street lamp cast long skeletal shadows of fire escapes across the heavy blackout curtains. My phone vibrated continuously on the nightstand until 3 a.m. David sent 42 text messages. The tone oscillated wildly. First, frantic apologies, then nostalgic recitations of our trip to Maine. Then bitter defensive accusations that I was an unforgiving, cold-hearted Puritan who was abandoning her marital vows at the first sign of human frailty. His final text arrived at 4:12 a.m. Maeve, are you seriously going to destroy my life over this? I stared at the illuminated Helvetica pixels for a long time. Then I typed back, I didn't destroy your life, David. I just stopped being the person subsidizing it. I hit send, blocked his number, and finally fell asleep. The next morning, I took a personal day from school and took an Uber down to LaSalle Street to meet Jennifer White. Jennifer White and I had shared a cinder block dorm room at W. Madison 15 years ago. She was now a junior partner at one of Chicago's most ruthless family law firms. She sat behind her mahogany desk, listened to my 20-minute breakdown of the facts, reviewed the printed WhatsApp files, and let out a long, low whistle. He is a special brand of sociopath, she said, tapping her silver Mont Blanc pen against the desk. Now, listen to me carefully, Maeve. Illinois is strictly a no-fault divorce state. The judge in Cook County does not give a single solitary damn that your husband orchestrated a bizarre infertility conspiracy theory. However, she leaned across the desk, her eyes gleaming with the sharp, predatory joy of a high-end litigator. David Miller is the sole equity partner of a boutique design firm whose entire survival relies on the social goodwill of wealthy, gossip-hungry North Shore housewives. If we file a standard contested petition and my office subpoenas his studio's financial accounts during discovery to verify those wire transfers to his mistress, this entire narrative becomes public record. He will lose every residential bid from Evanston to Lake Forest by Friday afternoon. Jennifer White smiled. We aren't going to trial, Maeve. We are going to offer his legal counsel a very quiet, highly expedited settlement agreement. You take your 50% of the Armitage Loft equity. You take 100% of your teacher's pension. You take your half of the joint liquid savings. And he pays your attorney fees in full to ensure this audio file never leaves my encrypted server. 2 weeks later, my mother drove down from Wisconsin. When she walked into my hotel room and saw the open Samsonite suitcase, her eyes brimmed with tears. I braced myself for the generational Midwest stoicism, the all men stumble. Honey, you have to protect your home lecture. Instead, my mother walked across the carpet, wrapped both arms around my neck, and pulled my head down into her shoulder. Pack your sweaters, Maeve, she whispered fiercely into my hair. Your father has the spare bedroom aired out. Don't you ever stay inside a burning house just to keep the neighbors warm? David signed the settlement agreement 34 days later at Cassid's conference table. He looked hollowed out. He had dropped at least 15 pounds. The tailored Tom Ford suit hung off his shoulders like a borrowed coat, and his eyes were rimmed with angry red exhaustion. Rumors had already begun leaking through the West Loop design subculture. Talia had retained her own legal counsel to serve him with a civil suit for financial coercion and fraudulent misrepresentation. 2 major commercial developers had quietly paused their design consultations with his firm. He sat across the granite table holding the rollerball pen over the signature line for nearly 2 minutes. Maeve, he said softly, not looking up. Is there really no version of the future where we talk? I looked at the man who had once been the center of my gravity. I felt an astonishing, profound stillness inside my chest. There was no anger left. There was no grief. There was only the quiet, liberating indifference of looking at an old high school yearbook photo of someone you used to sit next to in homeroom. "No, David," I said. "Sign the paper." He bowed his head and dragged the ink across the page. I spent the next 4 months living in my old childhood bedroom in Kenosha. The rhythm of the town was deliciously slow. I woke up at 7, drank dripped coffee out of heavy diner mugs at my parents' hardware store, and walked along the freezing Lake Michigan shoreline, watching the gray winter waves smash against the breakwater rocks. In late November, my phone buzzed with an unknown Chicago area code. It was a text from Talia. She had attached a photograph of a tiny, red-faced infant sleeping in a clear hospital bassinet wrapped in a standard striped receiving blanket. She weighed 7 pounds 4 ounces. The text read, "I took your advice. I tracked down the actual biological father and old ex-boyfriend from my hometown. We did the DNA swab at the clinic. He signed the birth certificate yesterday, and we're establishing a formal co-parenting agreement. I haven't spoken to David Miller since the day I left your porch." A second bubble popped up a moment later. "Thank you for not destroying my life that Tuesday," says Vance. I stood on the Kenosha Pier watching the winter sun fight through the cloud cover over the lake. I typed back, "Never mortgage your future on a man's promise again. Talia, raise your girl to be brave." 3 years later, on a warm afternoon in early May, was standing outside the main entrance of the Magnet High School in Lincoln Square, where I now taught senior AP literature. The bell had just rung. The courtyard was a chaotic, beautiful sea of teenagers spilling out onto the sidewalks, laughing, shouting, and throwing backpacks over their shoulders. I was leaning against the brick retaining wall, checking my email when I heard a small, tentative voice. "Miss Salister." I looked up. Standing 10 feet away was Talia. Her platinum hair was gone, replaced by a chic, natural chestnut bob. She was wearing a crisp white linen button-down, tailored high-waisted denim and practical leather loafers. Her skin looked bright, clear, and remarkably grounded. Holding her right hand was a little girl roughly 2½ years old, wearing a bright yellow sundress and sporting 2 messy toddler pigtails, her face smeared with the sticky purple residue of a grape popsicle. Talia smiled a genuine warm expression that reached the corners of her eyes. "I thought that was you." The toddler tilted her head back, squinting up at me against the spring glare. "Mommy, who that?" Talia squatted down on the concrete, using a damp wipe from her tote to clean the grape juice off her daughter's chin. "That is a very wonderful teacher Mommy used to know. Emily." The little girl blinked her massive brown eyes at me and offered a shy, sticky wave. "Hi, Tichu." I smiled, crouching down to match her eye level. "Hi, Emily. That's a very excellent sundress you have on." Talia stood back up, looking me dead in the eye. "I just wanted to tell you I'm working as a senior project coordinator for a commercial general contractor in Ravenswood now. I have my own 2-bedroom apartment. It's tight and the daycare tuition is murder, but I pay my own bills, every cent of it." "I'm really glad to hear that, Talia," I said, and I genuinely was. The toddler tugged violently on her mother's hand, demanding a trip to the nearby park swings. Talia laughed, let herself be dragged backward across the pavement, and offered me one final grateful wave before they disappeared around the corner of Western Avenue. That evening, I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my own apartment, a sunny 700 feet 1-bedroom in Andersonville. It didn't have 20 feet ceilings or custom Italian cabinetry, but the oak floors were mine, the vintage bookshelves were mine, and the silence belonged entirely to me. Out on the small row iron fire escape balcony, the clipping of the Rosa night owl I had salvaged from the old loft 3 years ago was sitting in a new terracotta pot. For the first 2 winters, it had looked entirely dead, just a thorny blackened stick refusing to yield. But as the Chicago twilight settled over the neighborhood, I noticed something near the crown of the main stem. There, bursting through the rough bark, was a single, perfect, deep velvet crimson bud, unfolding its very first petals into the evening air. I reached into my pocket for my pruning shears, thinking I'd snip it off to drop into a glass vase on my nightstand, but my fingers stopped an inch from the stem. "Leave it right where it is," I thought. When the July heat hits, it will take the heat. When the August thunderstorms roll off the lake, it will drink the rain. It didn't need to be severed from its root just to prove to someone sitting in a living room that it was capable of being beautiful. I stepped back inside, poured myself a steaming ceramic mug of peppermint tea, and sat down at my desk to grade my students' final essays. Watching the full spring moon rise slowly over the city rooftops, bright, round, and remarkably quiet.